Tenma is a genius surgeon with a strong sense of justice. 9 years ago, he was forced to choose between saving a young boy and saving the mayor. He chose to treat the boy who arrived at the hospital first. As a result, the mayor died. Because of this decision, Tenma was stripped of his position by his future father-in-law, who was also the hospital director. His fiancée also turned away from him and fell into another man's arms. But what Tenma never could have imagined was that the boy Johan, who wasn't even 10 years old, would turn out to be more terrifying than a monster. During his hospitalization, Johan murdered the hospital director, and in the 9 years after his discharge, he went on to kill 4 pairs of adoptive parents. Dr. Tenma, the man who had saved his life, was consumed by overwhelming guilt and decided to capture Johan with his own hands. However, during Tenma's pursuit of him, he was accidentally dragged into a murder case, and at the crime scene, he left behind his own necktie. Inspector Lunge traced that necktie all the way to Tenma's former fiancée, Eva. At the time, Eva did not tell Lunge the truth because she still loved Tenma. She hoped that Tenma would reconcile with her and return to how things once were. But after she was rejected by Tenma, she immediately went to find Inspector Lunge, and she told him that the necktie belonged to Tenma. From that moment on, a doctor who had saved countless lives became a wanted murderer. After escaping from the hospital, Tenma immediately sought out a retired soldier named Hugo. Hugo lived deep in the mountains, a perfect place for Tenma to hide. More importantly, Tenma realized that, if he wanted to capture Johan, he would need to strengthen his physical abilities and improve his counter-surveillance skills. After that, Tenma began a brutal 5-month training regimen. What he didn't know was that during this time, Hugo had been summoned by Inspector Lunge multiple times. It seemed that there was some kind of secret between them. Meanwhile, an unaware Tenma noticed something during his training. He discovered a girl who looked to be around 10 years old. She never spoke, yet the intensity of her training far surpassed even Tenma's. Tenma warned Lena that before her body had fully developed, she should avoid high-intensity training. Tenma initially assumed that the girl named Lena was a relative of Hugo's, but he never expected that Hugo was actually her mother's killer. Back when Hugo was fighting overseas, he was chased by enemy forces into a cabin in the woods. Inside lived a mother and her daughter. What Hugo never expected was that Lena's mother had already raised her gun, ready to pull the trigger at any moment. Left with no choice, Hugo fired first and killed her, but he couldn't bring himself to kill a child, so he took the girl with him. Even after the war ended, he continued to raise her. From that day on, Lena never spoke another word. She never smiled. Hugo knew very well that the girl might want to kill him at any moment, so he never guarded against her, because war has never been fair. If you don't kill the other person, they will kill you instead. It's only a matter of who acts faster. Hugo's worldview deeply shocked Tenma. Tenma felt that he needed to train himself even harder, because only then would he be able to capture Johan. In the days that followed, Tenma continuously strengthened his physical training. He also mastered the use of firearms. At this point, Tenma completed a true transformation, but what he worried about most was still the relationship between Hugo and Lena, because he noticed that although Lena appeared cold, her heart was actually incredibly gentle. One day, Lena picked up a small bird. She intended to take it back and raise it, but Tenma told her that once a bird leaves its nest, its chances of survival are less than 10%. After hearing this, Lena gently placed the bird into Tenma's hands, and those words deeply moved Lena. In that moment, she suddenly understood something. Even if Hugo had never appeared that day, other soldiers would have eventually stormed into the cabin, and in that case, she might have been killed as well. At that moment, Lena no longer knew whether she should feel hatred or gratitude. When Tenma's training finally ended and he was about to leave, he prepared a Japanese meal for the two of them. But Hugo, who had held a gun his entire life, didn't even know how to use chopsticks. His clumsy movements made Lena burst into laughter. That single smile from Lena meant that she had forgiven Hugo, and that she had finally let go of everything. Hugo, too, came to deeply admire Tenma, because without Tenma's arrival, nothing would have changed. This is who Tenma truly is. He doesn't just treat illness, he redeems the human heart. And if Johan had never existed, he would still be a doctor admired by everyone. After Tenma left, Inspector Lunge once again summoned Hugo to the police station, but when Lunge questioned Hugo about Tenma's whereabouts, Hugo said nothing. He simply stared at Lunge with a vicious glare, then stood up and walked out of the station. Hugo never cared why Tenma had been put on the wanted list. He only knew that someone as kind as Tenma, even if he picked up a gun, would never become a murderous monster. Hugo was also deeply grateful to Tenma. It was Tenma who gave him something resembling a real family. When Hugo returned to the mountains with Lena once more, Tenma was already gone. On the table, he had left behind a thick stack of cash. The reason Tenma left was because he had heard that another pair of politicians had been murdered. Tenma suspected that this was once again Johan's doing, so under the cover of night, he secretly infiltrated the city. At the same time, a thief named Reichwein had also set his sights on the murdered politician's home. He assumed that a politician's house would surely contain plenty of valuable items, but just as he was about to open the door, Tenma suddenly appeared behind him, aiming a gun at his back. Tenma demanded to know whether he recognized the owner of the house, and whether the owner had ever adopted a boy. When Reichwein realized that Tenma was not a police officer, he let out a sigh of relief. But at that very moment, the police arrived after receiving a report. Reichwein and Tenma had no choice but to flee immediately. The two quickly hid in a narrow alley. It was then that Reichwein finally recognized Tenma as the wanted surgeon from the newspapers. Tenma questioned him about the truth behind the politicians' deaths, but Reichwein had no interest in dealing with a fugitive. Just as he was about to leave, a bold idea suddenly crossed his mind. Recently, after violent clashes between gangs in the town, many injured gang members were too afraid to seek treatment at hospitals. Reichwein wanted to use this wanted doctor to treat those wounded criminals and make a huge profit in the process. He proposed a partnership to Tenma, promising that they could make a lot of money, but Tenma had no desire to get involved with the criminal underworld. However, just as Tenma was about to walk away, Reichwein said something that stopped him. He claimed to know the true cause of the politician's death. He said he had seen the killer, and more than that, he knew where the killer was hiding. Reichwein told Tenma that, if he agreed to cooperate, he would tell him where the murderer was. Left with no choice, Tenma agreed to work with him for the time being, but first, he wanted to meet that killer in person, so Reichwein led him to the front of an apartment building. Without hesitation, Tenma walked inside. Strangely enough, it seemed as if the person inside already knew someone was coming. The door wasn't even locked. When Tenma entered, he saw a man holding a handgun, sitting quietly in a chair, calmly and unhurriedly. The man began telling Tenma a story. He said he had grown up in this town. There used to be a vast field of sunflowers here, beautiful beyond words, but after a newly appointed politician arrived, the entire field was leveled to make room for a luxurious mansion. At the time, he felt angry, but not to the point of killing someone. That changed one day, when he met the politician's adopted son, Ellis. Ellis was a handsome young man in his early 20s. With a full head of blonde hair, there was something inexplicably captivating about him. Before long, the two men became close friends. One day, Ellis lamented how tragic it was that the sunflower field had been destroyed. He even mentioned that the politician frequently kept mistresses. Ellis said he no longer wanted to be part of that family. Ellis's words deeply resonated with the man, because his own parents had been torn apart by an affair. But when the man shared his parents' story with Ellis, Ellis's eyes lit up with excitement. He said that all unpleasant pasts could be erased, that life itself could be started anew. And just like that, under Ellis's subtle and relentless influence, the man acted as if possessed. He murdered the politician and his wife. At that moment, Tenma realized that the Ellis this man spoke of was undoubtedly Johan, the person he had been searching for all along. And the reason this man was sitting here waiting for Tenma was twofold. First, he wanted someone to confess his regret to. Second, Ellis had left a message specifically for Tenma. That message was written inside the study of the politician's mansion. It turned out that Johan had already anticipated that Tenma would trace everything back to this place. The man told Tenma that Ellis had once said Tenma's fate had long been sealed. After saying that, he raised the gun and took his own life. After that, Tenma entered the politician's study. Beneath a painting, he found the sentence Johan had left for him. This message was Johan's first direct and unmistakable provocation toward Tenma, marking the official awakening of the monster. At the same time, it implied that Tenma himself was the one who had created that monster. After reading it, Tenma clenched his teeth in fury. He never imagined that Johan was not only unrepentant, but actually taking pleasure in the crimes born from Tenma's mistake. At that moment, Tenma's desire to capture Johan became more urgent than ever. But just as Tenma stepped out of the politician's house, he was suddenly abducted at gunpoint. He was then taken to the side of a man who was critically wounded. They threatened Tenma, demanding that he save the man's life. Tenma glanced at the submachine gun resting on the cabinet and instantly understood who they were. They were the very people behind the terrorist attack that had happened earlier that morning. Tenma knew he would never operate on people like this. If he saved this man, even more innocent lives would be lost. Once before, he had saved Johan, and that single act had led to countless deaths. Now, he refused to allow a second Johan to exist. However, the wounded man spoke up. He said he was not someone who killed indiscriminately. He claimed that he had once been a lawyer named Karl. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, he lost his job. His entire family survived solely on a few acres of land, but a powerful capitalist, backed by money and influence, seized even that land from them. Later, that capitalist built towering high-rise buildings on it. Countless people were displaced as a result, their families destroyed, their lives ruined. Karl said he felt pride, not guilt, for killing that capitalist. He believed he had done nothing wrong. Karl declared that even after hearing this, Tenma still refused to treat him, then Tenma was not worthy of being called a doctor. After saying that, Karl began to feel an icy chill spread through his body. His consciousness started to fade. At that very moment, Tenma stood up and stepped forward. He asked Karl a single question: "Do you think death is frightening? The 12 people you shot dead this morning felt exactly the same fear you're feeling right now. Don't talk about capitalists stealing land and ruining lives. That is not a justification for murder. This world has laws. Evil must be judged by the law. Even if you seek revenge, even if you believe you're punishing the wicked, you still have no right to slaughter the innocent." Among the 12 people you killed, there was a child who was only 12 years old, wasn't there? After saying that, Tenma ordered Karl's men to quickly bring disinfectant and a stapler. The reason he had refused to treat Karl earlier was simply to make him experience the terror of death firsthand. After performing only basic first aid, Tenma decided to take Karl to a nearby hospital for more advanced treatment. But just as they stepped outside, police sirens began to wail from all directions. Karl also realized at that moment that Tenma was the wanted doctor from the newspapers. He told Tenma to leave him behind and escape while he still could. But before parting, Karl asked Tenma one final question. He wanted to know why Tenma would save a violent criminal like him, someone who had killed innocent people. Tenma answered calmly, saying that he believed Karl still possessed a shred of humanity. Tenma's words left Karl deeply shaken. They stirred memories of the sense of justice he once held back when he was still a lawyer. After escaping, Tenma continued his investigation and traced Johan's past to the 511 Kinderheim orphanage. There, he uncovered another shocking truth. That orphanage was actually a closed training facility, created by high-ranking officials of the former East German government. On the surface, it was presented as an ordinary orphanage for the children of political prisoners and spies. But behind closed doors, the children were subjected to brutal training. Their captors sought to sever them completely from their humanity. The ultimate goal was to mold them into ruthless soldiers and instruments of murder. This project was known among the elite as the Devil's Experiment. Without a doubt, the Johan Tenma had been searching for all this time was one of those children. Meanwhile, Karl remained consumed by guilt over accidentally killing the 12-year-old child. In the end, he chose to turn himself in. In this part of the story, Tenma redeemed 3 people. He gave Hugo, who had long lived in isolation, a sense of what it meant to have a home. He allowed Lena, once filled with hatred and silence, to finally smile, and he reignited the humanity buried deep within Karl's heart. Without question, both Hugo and Karl believed the same thing, that Tenma was a good doctor, a doctor who didn't just heal bodies, but also saved souls.